Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Anti-Doping Podcast, brought to you by the Partnership for Clean Competition. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and today we are joined by our guest, Dr. Caroline Rickards. Listeners, Caroline is a professor in the Department of Physiology and Anatomy at the University of North Texas Health Science Center in Fort Worth. And today, we're looking forward to talking more about Caroline and sharing insights and practical advice for researchers out there who need to share their work with a variety of different audiences. So, Caroline, welcome to the show today. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Marie, and I very much appreciate the invitation to speak with you and to share some of my insights into this topic.
Well, we are delighted to have you, and I'm looking forward to getting into the details of our conversation today. But perhaps we can start by just getting a little bit of background first. So, Caroline, can you tell us more about yourself and how you got interested in research?
As you can probably tell by my accent, I'm not from the US originally. I actually grew up in Australia. So I completed all of my formal education, including my PhD back in Australia, and then came over to the US in 2005 for a postdoctoral fellowship. But leading up to that, in high school, I was very interested in the sciences, and I kind of veered toward the hard sciences of physics and chemistry and those sorts of things to improve my chances of getting into university courses. And then I completed a Bachelor of Science degree as an undergrad. My original plan was actually to go to medical school, but in Australia at the time, getting into medical school was very challenging straight out of high school. So I decided to go into the science degree. And it was there actually that I discovered research and that you could actually have a career in research. I didn't even know what a PhD was when I first started my undergraduate degree. So I was exposed to opportunities in research as an undergrad. That really was something I got interested in. I think the discovery process and the problem-solving process were really two things that really drew me into that area. So then started pursuing opportunities in research as an undergraduate and then progressed through to graduate school. So it was really not something I had ever dreamed of as a kid, but something I kind of worked my way through once I got into my undergraduate degree.
I think that's fantastic. I was a failed almost medical school student as well. I got stuck on research, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. I think sometimes it's a bit of a personality match as well. And I think just doing research matches the things that innately I enjoy doing. As I say, that discovery process and problem-solving process are two of the big things I've really recognized as being part of my personality.
Absolutely. And you kind of highlighted your career path, some of the steps along the way for you, but can you tell us, how did you end up there as a professor at the University of North Texas Health Science Center?
So as I was completing my PhD in Australia, I was exploring opportunities for postdoctoral fellowships. And quite a lot of graduate students in Australia explore opportunities outside of Australia for postdoctoral training. Australia is a very big country, but it's quite isolated. So a lot of us look abroad to find opportunities to get training elsewhere. And then most often people come back to Australia with that training and continue on with their careers. So I was doing that. I was exploring opportunities in Europe and in North America. And I was reaching out to multiple folks in different places. And one of the people I reached out to was actually working for the US Army at the Institute for Surgical Research in San Antonio, Dr. Victor Convertino. And that was where I eventually went to for my postdoctoral fellowship. So I went from being a graduate student in Australia to being a postdoctoral fellow in a US military installation, which was quite a big change for me. Obviously, culture shocks in many ways, coming from a different country and then working within that military research environment. But it was certainly a really productive and very meaningful experience that I had. And the work that we were doing was related to a lot of battlefield injuries that were occurring. This was in the early 2000s when there was a lot of wars going on in different parts of the world. And so it was a lot of applied research that we were doing to try and help protect the soldier in the battlefield. So that was at the Institute for Surgical Research from 2005 to 2012. And I was also a research assistant professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio for about 4 years there, but still working in the Army lab. And from there, I launched my search for a faculty position. And I was interviewing here at the University of North Texas Health Science Center and secured my first faculty position here. So I've actually been in this institution from the very beginning of my tenure track faculty career. So I came up here in 2012 I always said when I was a graduate student that I didn't want to go to the US and I didn't want to go to Texas and I didn't want to work for the military. And look what happened.
Here you are.
But it was an excellent opportunity for me and really launched my career and provided a lot of opportunities for me to then explore the career in academia. Again, not something I had thought about doing. Even when I was a PhD student, I was not really convinced of wanting to go into academia, but I really enjoyed the process of learning how to do this job, how to train students and postdoctoral fellows and other folks working in the lab, and also being in the classroom and teaching. So yeah, it's been a very rewarding career.
Fantastic. Well, Caroline, it's wonderful to hear a little bit more about your career path and how you got to where you are today. But I'd love to talk a little bit about your research as well, just to give our listeners a sense of what your daily life as a scientist looks like. So can you tell us what kind of research do you do in your lab?
So I'm a cardiovascular physiologist, and my main area of focus has been on the regulation of brain blood flow. And the model that we use is predominantly with humans, and we can actually simulate or use different stresses in the lab to then assess how the brain regulates blood flow. Working with the military, one of the major injury mechanisms is hemorrhage, so major blood loss injuries. So one of the main areas that we were focused on was trying to understand, one, how individuals respond to hemorrhagic injuries from a physiological standpoint. Two was trying to develop interventions that could be used to improve survival from hemorrhagic injuries. And then third was trying to develop monitoring technologies that would improve the detection of blood loss and also the responsiveness to treatments. So that was what I was focused on for my postdoc work, and that's really carried on through into my own research laboratory here at the UNT Health Science Centre. So as I say, we're focused on brain blood flow regulation, but really cardiovascular regulation is more broadly what we're interested in, with a main focus on human models, but I've just recently started to work on some animal models as well. So it's very translational work with ideally the intention is to try and develop therapies to improve survival and also these monitoring technologies as well to improve detection and tracking responsiveness to therapy.
Very interesting. And as our listeners probably guessed, we're not going to delve into your research today because it is a little bit outside of the field of anti-doping, but we really do want to talk about your science communication skills and how scientists can communicate better. And the field of anti-doping in particular is bringing together people from just a wide variety of different backgrounds. And this includes, of course, researchers, but also clinicians, athletes, coaches, sports leagues, policymakers, these national anti-doping organizations around the world, lawyers, funding agencies, and other professionals. The list can go on and on. So, Caroline, can you share why it's so important for anti-doping scientists out there who might be listening to communicate the work that they do in ways that are accessible for all of these different stakeholders that we have?
Yeah, and I think my response to the question is really applicable to any field, but I think it's just trying to make others understand why the work that you do is important. I think most of us as scientists, we want to have an impact in whatever field we're working in. And I think if we can't communicate the work that we do and the implications of the work that we do to all of those different stakeholders, whether they're experts or not within our specific area of science, the work that we do won't really go very far. So I think it's really just trying to ensure that folks understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the implications of that work are to the field. I think within the anti-doping world, we need to ensure that there's trust in the process of detecting individuals who might be doping and that the field of competition is fair. So I think for people to understand the scientific processes behind testing technologies and those sorts of things is very important for them to trust that process and then appreciate that what's happening out in the field is a fair process.
Absolutely. And I think another challenge that we encounter just in science communication in general, and maybe particularly in anti-doping, is that there's a lot of nuance to it, right? I think a lot of people think that, okay, when you're doing maybe a drug test, you collect a sample, you run it through, it gives you a yes or a no. But when you're interpreting the data that you see, it's not always straightforward. So what are some things that scientists can do to maybe more effectively communicate the results of their research to different audiences and try to communicate in a way that people are sort of expecting when they just want that black or white yes or no?
I was thinking about this earlier, and sometimes the precision of language that we use as scientists sometimes gets in the way of communicating the information because we're trained to be very precise in what we say and how we say it. And I think sometimes when you get into the weeds, the technicalities of things, I think that gets in the way of actually communicating information effectively. So I think it's just trying to understand that not every person you speak to will have that background and understanding of what you're talking about. And so trying to relate to them in some way that's understandable wherever they're coming from.
So this helps when you're thinking about maybe talking to people who are outside of the realm of science, is kind of thinking about who your audience is, thinking about how you can maybe make your work relevant for them, make sure they understand why it's important, and make sure that you are communicating with terms that they're familiar with and understand. But even I think within the research community, communicating the results of your work isn't necessarily easy. And I think in anti-doping, this is a particular challenge again as well, because the researchers within the community have backgrounds that span a wide variety of fields. So we're talking chemistry, biology, toxicology, physiology, like yourself, exercise science, sports physiology, but then also going into social sciences, ethics, and other fields. So how can anti-doping scientists maybe better communicate their work within this really interdisciplinary setting, or with scientists who are coming from other fields?
I think what you mentioned before is knowing your audience is so important, and trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes. I'm not a chemist, for example, so I would need to understand where the other person's coming from and vice versa. So I think always thinking simple to start with as well. Keep things simple and straightforward to start with, and then progress through the conversation from there. Launching straight up with a lot of jargon and technical language, that's one way to turn someone off very quickly and not be able to engage in the process. So I think regardless of whether it's another scientist or if it's your grandmother, trying to keep things relatively simple and straightforward, and then the language and explanations can get more complicated as you progress through and gauge people's understanding of what you're saying. Maybe the complexity of the information may change, but the approach, I think, can remain the same.
Absolutely. And I think the initial steps of just gauging people's understanding and background, and like you said, getting to know your audience before you launch into the whole big conversation can help as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you certainly don't want to insult people's intelligence, but I would rather someone speak to me very simply to start with, and then through conversation, we can figure out where we stand and then choose a direction of where that conversation will go at that point.
Definitely. And I think you brought up an important point there, and just mentioning that you don't want to overwhelm your audience with jargon, particularly when you might be working with people from other fields. But it can be difficult to even identify what constitutes jargon. What are the terms in your field that you use every day that you just don't think about, that may not be something that other people understand? So what helps you take a step back and understand what are the things that you need to simplify or define?
I had this experience quite often, and even just this morning, I was in the lab consenting a new research participant into a study. And these are individuals who are volunteering their time to be part of a study, and trying to make sure that from an ethical standpoint, we have to make sure that we're not overwhelming an individual with jargon and technical language and complexity that's not really necessary. So I think the stakes are a little bit higher in that case, right? Because the consent process for a research participant, there's a legal connotation to that. It's not just having a conversation with a friend. And so I think that reinforces the need to try and keep things simple and make sure they understand. Often I will make sure that there's an understanding of information, so you get people to repeat the information back to you. If you have explained something, that's a good way to gauge understanding of the information. But I think, again, just trying to keep things as simple as possible and take things from there. It's very easy to use jargon, obviously, and when we're talking to our colleagues, it's just part of our language. But yeah, really having to appreciate that not everyone has the same background and training. So ensuring they understand exactly what you're saying and why, and understand the implications of what you're explaining to them.
Certainly. And on the topic of training, I'm curious, what are some of the steps that you've taken, or maybe the courses that you've been involved with, to enhance your own science communication skills?
I haven't really had formal training in science communication. A lot of it has just been on-the-job training and actually teaching graduate students how to be better communicators. It reinforced to me that I need to be a better communicator as well. So if I'm trying to train my students how to be better communicators, then I need to listen to those lessons myself. So yeah, I haven't had, formal training. It's been a lot of reading and listening to others, going to informally workshops and those sorts of things to better understand the essential elements of science communication, speaking to others who are more experienced and expertise than me as well in terms of what's worked for them and some of the core principles of how to be a better science communicator.
Absolutely. And I really like the point that you mentioned of kind of learning from others, because I think understanding where the gaps are, I think understanding the strategies and the tips that people can give you to communicate your work better can be particularly helpful. So for you, can you share an example, Caroline, of a time when you did find it challenging to communicate your science with someone who is outside of your area of expertise, whether they were in science or outside of science?
This is still something I struggle with. It's really explaining your research to your family and friends who are not scientists, and even to people like your hairdresser, for example.
Right.
So I have a great hairdresser and they always ask, what have you been working on recently? And sometimes that's really challenging to answer because you want to engage in the conversation and explain what you're doing and why it's important, rather than dismissing the conversation and saying, oh, I've been busy without any details. That process has been challenging. And I've really been trying to recognize when I'm going to dismiss something and try and engage in the conversation and try and connect with the person. Individuals are asking because they're interested. So the last thing you want to do is dismiss somebody, and you certainly want to engage with them and have that conversation and let them know what you've been doing, but not get overwhelmed in the details. Like I said before, try not to let the precision get in the way of effective communication.
Definitely. And I think the example that comes to mind for me a lot immediately is sort of when you sit down next to somebody on a plane and this is a perfect stranger, so you don't know their background, and they ask you, oh, what do you do? Or why are you traveling? And you're going to a scientific conference or something like that. So do you have, I guess, advice of if you encounter these kinds of challenges, how do you overcome them, or what level of detail is appropriate?
I often start with just saying that I'm a professor at a university, just because there's always a connection to teaching to start with. And then it will be, oh, where do you teach and who do you teach? And so it will be, well, I'm teaching physiology and to medical students and graduate students, and I have a research laboratory as well. And then that might evolve into questions about what type of research that I do. So it's trying to make that connection with something that's perhaps more familiar to the individual to start with. From there, we can carry on into conversations about the specific research that I do, if that's where the conversation goes. I'm not there to push anything on anybody if they're not interested. So often in that kind of situation you mentioned, it's a lot of small talk and courteous conversation. So you don't need to necessarily get into the weeds. But yeah, I think, as I say, trying to find that connection to start with is the way that I've tried to approach things, and then just see where the conversation goes.
Absolutely. And do you have, I guess, any lessons learned from experiences where things have gone well or perhaps not very well in terms of trying to communicate your science?
The big ones are just getting into the complexities when it's not necessary, getting into the use of jargon and terms that people may not be familiar with, which you often lose folks if they feel overwhelmed. You don't ever want people to feel like they're not intelligent because they don't understand what you're saying. You don't want that to happen, right? That really cuts off conversation. Again, just trying to make sure you connect with people first and then see where the conversation goes. But yeah, I've had plenty of conversations, as I'm sure many of us have, where you get started and you can see the other person's eyes glaze over because they've lost interest very quickly. So
they're planning their escape. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, oh, that's nice. And then they move on to something else. So you sometimes just learn from the experiences and figure out what to do for the next time. But I've had many of those conversations in the past where it just hasn't gone anywhere because you've made things more complicated too quickly.
So we talked about things like jargon, things like making that personal connection and understanding who your audience is. What other challenges do you find arise in your everyday science communication, Caroline?
Some of the issues, I guess, is some mistrust of scientists and the medical profession in some regards. But so trying to make connections with people is really important. So if you're working in a clinical area, particularly that people will be familiar with, so things like hypertension or stroke or heart attacks, those sorts of things, like trying to connect with people and situations that they might be familiar with. As I mentioned before, a lot of the work that I've done has been focused on responses to blood loss injuries. So people connect with the military connections that I can make with that, but also a lot of the civilian connections as well with major car accidents and those sorts of things. So I think, yeah, there is some mistrust within the scientific process and within the medical community. And so really trying to relate to people in that way is important to try and maintain that trust in the process.
Absolutely. And I think this idea of struggling to maintain or establish even this trust in science is a huge challenge in the world today. Do you have any advice for scientists who want to work towards this greater good? Or what things do you do to try to help ensure that things are conducted accordingly in your research and that you're doing work that people should have trust in?
I think being an ethical scientist is obviously one of the most important things. That's at the very beginning, from the way that we are collecting data and analyzing the data and presenting it in research papers and scientific presentations, that we're always doing things in the most ethical way possible, that we're very careful about the way that we collect data and the way that we present it. We're not inflating the information that we're presenting in any way. Also, from a mentoring perspective, making sure that my trainees understand the importance to collect information and report information in the most ethical way possible. And I think that they have that understanding from the very beginnings of their career, and that there's no point in putting incorrect information out there because it's going to lead to pretty negative consequences in many ways. From a day-to-day operations standpoint, that's my obligation, to ensure that what we publish and what we present and put out into the world is work that's been done in the most ethical way possible.
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of scientists out there, they maybe want to communicate their work more broadly, but they don't really know how to get that process started. They don't know how to make those connections within their community or outside of their community to be able to share their work more broadly. So, Caroline, do you have some examples of different opportunities that you've pursued that have allowed you to communicate your science with a broader audience?
I think the most basic way is what we've been talking about already, is trying to communicate your science with your loved ones, with your family and friends. That's the beginnings of communicating your science. And if you're able to do that well, then hopefully that will continue on to the people that they speak with, as they're maybe discussing my research with my mum and she starts talking to her friends about it. And so, that's one avenue and pathway to effectively communicate your science and the importance of it to the broader community. Other avenues would be using social media, for example. So my predominant social media platform at the moment is LinkedIn. So I use that very much as a way of advertising for our laboratory in terms of achievements of my trainees in particular, and trying to keep that not too technical in the way that I present information, and really promoting the successes of trainees. So there's some of the big ways that I'm trying to get the information out there. And obviously from the more scientific audiences, presenting work in papers and conference presentations. And then for manuscripts these days, there's a lot of journals that are now requesting more simplified explanations, like the key takeaways or lay summaries or visual abstracts, for example. There's another way of trying to communicate your science. That's to a non-specialist. But a lot of that information can also be shared to the general public. If you're writing lay summary statements for manuscripts or grant applications, that information is a way to share your work with the broader community.
Absolutely. And I think it can be intimidating too for scientists starting this process, especially if they're relatively early in their career. They might not feel comfortable sharing their work so publicly. So whether it's even just the university PR team reaching out about a particular topic that someone's an expert in, or a local news station reaches out about a story and they just want some facts or expert quotes there, or even these podcast invitations where people get invited to talk about their work on a show. So how can scientists maybe best prepare themselves to take advantage of some of these opportunities to disseminate their research and to talk with a more general audience?
One thing is some institutions are now offering media training. And actually, I just got an email this week from my institution to do some more formal media training.
Wonderful.
I thought you might appreciate that, but that's certainly an opportunity to have more formal training in how to communicate your science. The other thing is just practicing to whatever group you can. And as I say, don't shy away from practicing your communication skills to your family members and your friends and people who are not within your specific discipline. Trying things out as well, like developing novel approaches to presentations and just trying them out the next time you give a seminar. So I've been trying out a unique way of introducing one of my areas of research in seminars to try and hook people in to the seminar. And I tried it out once here just locally and it worked well. And so I've been trying it out with different audiences and seeing how that works. But I think just not being afraid of giving things a shot. And if they work, then great. That can evolve into something you do all the time. Or you can change things up if it doesn't hit home. But I think just not being afraid to try out different things and see how they work.
Definitely. And I think one of the things that these science communication training opportunities often encourage people to do is develop this elevator pitch, quote unquote, where it's a short, maybe 30-second introduction to your research. Is this something that you've built for yourself, or do you have different versions that you try for different audiences?
I do, and every time I start them, they always change midway. So that's often my problem. I'll change tack halfway through. But yes, absolutely. That's one of the approaches that I also help my trainees develop, and have different versions. Like sometimes the rehearsed version won't always work. Again, you're 15 seconds in and you can see that glazed eyes and it's not hitting. So you have to change things up midway through. It's an evolving process for me, is trying to figure out what I want to say and how I want to say it, and don't let the details get in the way of the story.
Absolutely. And I think that story idea is important because these different stories are going to resonate with different audiences. So you have to be ready to change tack and ready to, like you alluded to, customize it to who you're talking to.
Absolutely. And the storytelling piece is something I try and teach my trainees. And it's not making up stories, right? It's not fairy tales, but it's certainly having a story to tell in your 10-minute presentation or your 45-minute presentation or whatever it might be, making sure that there is a start, a middle, and an end, and everything's connected and you've got a thread that's going through the entire presentation. But yeah, I mean, storytelling is important from presenting work in seminars or manuscripts, but most particularly when you're trying to present the work to a more lay audience, trying to create those connections to people.
Certainly. So what are your thoughts, Caroline, on how different educational institutions can better prepare students, maybe particularly graduate students, with science communication skills that will serve them later in their careers?
Yeah, this is something very relevant to what I've been doing over the last few years. One of my colleagues actually started a new science communication course in our department, the Department of Physiology and Anatomy, a few years ago. When she left the institution, I picked up that course that she had developed and have been formally teaching our graduate students skills in scientific communication for the last few years. So for me, that's one of the best ways of introducing trainees to those fundamental skills of science communication, is having a required coursework component. So that started in our department. We now actually have a course that has been implemented that's a required course for all of our first-year graduate students. So all our traditional PhD and master's students actually have to take a one-semester credit-hour course on the fundamentals of science communication. So I think that's the best way to broadly ensure that all the students at least have had that introductory course on fundamental skills. The other opportunities, I've been running also a 3-minute thesis competition within my department for the last few years. So that's, again, having students present their work in a very succinct way to a non-specialist scientific audience. That's been an excellent way of them trying to communicate their science in a less complicated way. So I think it's providing those types of opportunities. Students, they can get through an entire graduate program without ever necessarily learning any of those skills, and they'll be quite successful in doing their science. So I think it's providing those novel opportunities for them to learn these skills that they may not otherwise get an opportunity to learn.
Definitely. And I really love this 3-minute thesis competition, because I think that's something scientists often struggle with, is getting to the point quickly. Because you do get lost in these details if you don't have a plan of how you're going to get from the beginning of the story to the end.
Exactly. And making it impactful as well, right? It's not just a matter of boiling down your research into 3 minutes, but it's making it in some way memorable and telling that story in a very short period of time. But yeah, I mean, some of the best 3-minute thesis presentations I've seen, they've just got some really unique hook that just draws you in and gets you interested in that topic. So again, not letting the details get in the way. I always say, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. You want to make sure, obviously, that you're accurate in the information you're presenting, but you can do it in all sorts of novel ways.
Absolutely. And I think another one of the challenges that we haven't touched on with science communication is that it changes over the years. And it's something where, whether it's the channels that you have available to communicate, the preferences and expectations of the audience, the strategies. So for you, how has science communication changed over the course of your career, Caroline? And how have you been adapting to these changes as you see them coming?
It's changed 180 degrees since I was a graduate student. I mean, we didn't talk about this at all. I'm not that old. I went through graduate school in the early 2000s. So I think over the last 20 years, even over the last 5 or 10 years, it's really changed dramatically in terms of there being a better appreciation of the need for scientists to better communicate their research to broader communities. So I think it's really changed dramatically. I think obviously social media is a big area that's changed as well for the good and the bad, I guess. It's now a great platform for us to communicate our research quickly to a pretty big audience. Things can get shared pretty quickly. But there's the flip side as well, unfortunately, that a lot of misinformation can be shared quickly as well. So I think they're the biggest things is just the fact that science communication is now much more in the spotlight is a big thing, but also the platforms where we can share our research have really evolved very quickly over the last decade or so, I guess.
Definitely. I think it is a complicated landscape out there now, which can be difficult for scientists to navigate, particularly if they just kind of want to dip their toes in and get started. So do you have recommendations for, I guess, where scientists should start if they want to maybe engage in whether it's social media or just science communication more broadly? What's a good low investment place that scientists can go to start to share their research?
I would say pick your social media platform of choice, whichever one that might be. As I said before, I've got a LinkedIn page, which I think is becoming much more popular within the scientific community. You can just start posting little stories, posts about the work that's going on in your lab. I use that as a way to promote my trainees, and that's predominantly what I'm posting on LinkedIn. So that could be a really good starting point because one, it's getting information out about your research, but also it's providing exposure for your trainees as well. Getting their name out there into the wider world of the scientific community. So that would be my recommendation is utilize social media. Don't be afraid of social media. I think there's a lot of folks still that are not using any social media platforms, but I think that's the way to communicate information. And for me, it's actually a place where I learn a lot of information as well. We're getting a lot of journals and scientific organizations are posting information on social media. A lot of my colleagues are posting new papers or new achievements from their laboratory. And so it's a way of connecting with your community in a pretty low stakes, low time investment platform.
Absolutely. And I've seen a lot of opportunities for trainees posted or, people who are hiring, cool webinars. There's all kinds of great information that scientists are sharing out there on social media. And I know the evolution is not complete. Science communication is continuing to change. So do you have thoughts, Caroline, on how you think science communication will continue to evolve in the coming years?
I think there's probably going to be more of an expectation for trainees to communicate their work to broad audiences. I hope there's more of a effort of scientists to get involved in communicating their work to policymakers, people making decisions at the government level as well, trying to convince others of the importance of research and things like ensuring that we continue to have research funding available and really trying to explain the importance of the work that we do day to day that eventually end up in treatments and solutions for different clinical conditions. So that's my hope. There's more of an engagement with the scientific community to ensure that our research can continue and that we can continue to work toward providing solutions to these health problems that exist out there.
Absolutely. And I think another great opportunity for sharing research and engaging in science communication that we haven't talked about in too much detail are these scientific conferences. And I know you recently presented on sharing research results at the American Physiological Society or APS Summit. And I think this is where the connection with the PCC came in. So Caroline, can you talk about your experience at that meeting and what it was like to do this presentation to that group there?
So this was actually a science communication focused presentation. So it was similar to what we're discussing today, is providing some tips to the audience on how to communicate science effectively. So it was quite an honor to be invited to speak about this particular topic and have a lot of great engagement with the audience and an appreciation of the importance of how to communicate science effectively. It was a great experience and I hope to continue presenting that type of work moving forward. As you mentioned, I was invited to this podcast and I was also invited to give a talk at a local conference at some point in the future. So it's provided good opportunities to continue discussing these issues and engaging more people in the importance of science communication.
Definitely. And I think just having more of the science communication content in these kinds of conferences helps inspire or maybe encourage scientists to get out there and maybe do a better job of communicating their work. So for listeners out there who are feeling like they need to do more, what advice would you give to scientists who want to better communicate the results of their work?
Just practicing as much as possible in different forums. Try not to shy away from opportunities to talk about your work in different environments that you're in. Finding all those opportunities. So if your PR group or media team at your institution want to talk to you about your research, then say yes. Have those conversations to people locally. and just trying to talk to as many people as you can about the work that you do and the importance of the work that you do. There's also opportunities. I know the American Physiological Society have different opportunities to develop different writing options, different stories and things on different topics. So different professional organizations have opportunities to speak about your research to more of a lay audience and try and connect with people in that way. So just exploring the opportunities you might have locally within your institution or within your professional organization, or even with different funding agencies. There's different opportunities to be able to try and communicate your science with those groups as well. And then if your work is applicable, trying to find community groups that you can speak with as well and discuss the importance of your work. So I think just seeking out different opportunities that could provide avenues for you to, one, practice your skills and really get the importance of your work out into the community.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more. I love this idea of just trying different things, making sure people are practicing. And I think an important lesson is it's okay if sometimes the message flops, right? I think as scientists, we're used to getting sometimes harsh feedback on the writing that we do for science. And that somehow doesn't feel as personal as if you're putting something out there on a social media post and it gets no interest or maybe some grumpy comments. And I think that's something that scientists just sort of have to be a little bit more comfortable with is it's okay to fail in science. Sometimes you learn lessons from those failures, but the same goes, I think, for science communication.
Absolutely. I think that some of us, and I'd count myself in that as well, that sometimes I'm a little reluctant because it takes effort to try and figure out how to say things in certain ways to certain people. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. You're not hitting the mark. So I think just trying things out, and things will evolve over time as you try things and tweak the information as you go along.
Well, wonderful advice for our listeners. If people who are listening today want to learn more about you and the work that you're doing, what are the best places for them to get more information?
I'm on LinkedIn. Caroline Rickards, PhD is my LinkedIn name. I also have a website for my laboratory. It's rickardslab.com. So there are two main areas that you can find out about my work. Also, you can look me up on PubMed if you're a scientist and want to learn more details about the publications that my laboratory has out there.
Perfect. Well, listeners, definitely take some time to check out Caroline's website, check out her papers on PubMed, and also get connected on LinkedIn. And Caroline, thank you so much for joining us today to share some of your expertise and to encourage and inspire some of our listeners out there to share their science.
Thanks so much, Marie. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I look forward to continued conversations.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure to have you here today. Listeners, always wonderful to have you here with us as well. We hope you'll take a moment to rate our podcast, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And listeners, please note that the Anti-Doping Podcast features a wide variety of clean sport experts, and episodes may include statements and/or viewpoints that do not necessarily reflect the views or values of the PCC. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Anti-Doping Podcast.